at, as I look at all of you here in our session, I'm thinking, let's talk about leadership. Let's talk about leading family engagement. All right, so that's where I'm headed here. So I'm really glad that you all chose this. And so what I'd really love to do right now is to have you introduce yourselves using the chat. Would you please type the name of your town or district and your name in the chat? I see Kendra from Lincoln, Nebraska. I think there was a Larissa from Nebraska. Well, welcome. We're glad here. I see people from Marion and Mount Healthy and Thomasville, North Carolina. How exciting to see all of you in Butler County. Hi, Becky. We're glad you're here. It's good to see people from Reynoldsburg, too, which is just a small town here in Ohio, but that's my answer. I am in Reynoldsburg, Ohio. So Youngstown, Lorain County, Columbus City Schools. It's great to have all of you. Thank you for joining us here. I'm really excited to have perspectives from other states here as well. So here's an all play for you. And by all play, you know, when we play, if you've ever done gaming, you know, sometimes there's solo play, sometimes there's play with a partner, and sometimes it's all play. So this is an all play for all of you. I hope you put your hands and fingers on the keyboard. And if you could just use one mode of communication for an entire month, what would it be? I'm wondering how many of you are loving Zoom and you would just Zoom with everybody. How many of you would just be using your cell phone? How many of you would just use Facebook? Or how many of you would take out a billboard? What would you do? Would you use sign language so you could just be quiet? I'm wondering. Just enter that into the chat. What would you use if you just had one mode of communication? Facebook, Google Meets, Facebook, Zoom, email, face-to-face, but not right now. Thanks, Jill. Zoom, Google Meets, cell phone, face-to-face, cell phone. Face-to-face talk, nothing like face-to-face, but phone calls are the next best. I'm with you, Jen. Great. Yeah, my vote is for face-to-face too. I think I'm like a lot of us who are kind of missing that. All right, thanks. And a cell phone, Lisa, face-to-face. All right. Well, thanks for jumping in on that, everybody. Just stay close to your keyboard and we'll talk to, I have other questions and things I'd like to learn from you in a little while. Here's our guiding question for this session. So how can we partner with families to support family engagement and learning in 2020, 2021? That's where we're headed today with this session. You know, there's a lot of uncertainty, right? There's a lot we don't know. We know that our kids want to be in school. Preschool through college, right? They want to be with their friends. They want to be in classrooms. Families want to work. Our educators want to teach, right? There are some things that are certain, but there's also a lot of uncertainty. We're all really uncertain about when we're going to sort of get back to normal and have normal interactions with one another. We're wondering about how we're going to really navigate this time. There's a lot of uncertainty. We all want normalcy. We all want to change from right now is what we want change from. But you know, there's a really healthy perspective that I think in our work with families and our work with schools, a perspective we really need to lean into right now is that growth mindset. Carol Dweck is the author of that. And Kristen's going to post a link to Carol Dweck and to a couple links for her if you want to know more about that. But, you know, we have this growth mindset approach to things. And I think we need this in our messaging and how we work with families now and how we talk to one another about how we're working with families is, and from our leader perspective is, we can do this. We can partner well with families. We're going to do it, and we're going to do it together, right? That needs to be a message. We are able to do this, that we are going to make mistakes. We're going to, and we're going to learn from them. So we don't end at mistakes, right? We're going to make mistakes, and we're going to learn from them. That's an important message from Growth Mindset, and I think it's an important message from our leaders in our schools and in our communities to our families and to our school personnel right now. Another is that we're going to learn from each other and we're going to adapt and try new ways. And that's part of what today is about. And part of why I'm excited to see people here from other states. Learning from another is really, and it's an important part of it, approaches their work with this growth mindset. I'm going to learn from other people. I can adapt. There are new ways. There are other ways. We never say, I've tried everything. because we haven't, right? There are new ways. And another is we're going to keep working at it until we succeed. And I think this is an important message for our school personnel and for our families, and a really important message. It needs to be woven through all of our communication with families and how we do this, is that we're going to persist in this. We are with you. We want you to succeed. We're going to do this together. We're going to persist. So today, what I really want to focus on with you, and what I think is important for all of us to focus on, if we're going to kind of narrow down, say, I can't do everything, things are different right now, I need to focus and work smart, what am I going to focus on? And I think we need to focus on communication, number one, right? We need to focus on supporting that learning that's happening at home and connecting families with those community supports. This is really also the focus of the Ohio Department of Education's Restart Guidance. If you look at that document, and Kristen's going to post the link for you here, that document is focused on these three areas as well. And we were happy to partner with them in sort of the writing of that. These are critical areas for us to focus on: communication, supporting learning at home, and connecting our families with supports in the community. And so I hope that as you're thinking, where do I focus? Let's start here. Let's narrow in and really bring our focus to these three areas. So this is what I want to do today with you as well. So I really want to start with this area of communication. And as a leader, I hope that you will sort of latch on to the important idea that early communication is a powerful investment. It pays dividends later on. And early, I might mean early in the school year, early before people need to know things, they know ahead of time, early in a child's life, right? Early, and this also, if you think about it, it is proactive. It's before problems start. We have a tendency, and this has been sort of demonstrated by research in our country, we as a culture, as a whole group, can really tend to focus on family engagement as something we do when there's a problem. If you kind of stop someone on a street, a lot of people in our country will say, well, sure, we need to work together. When there's a problem, families and schools need to get together and solve it. That's great. We're not very good at solving problems with folks we don't know. And so getting out ahead, being early, being proactive. And so as a leader, sort of taking a stance on engagement and on communication that says, we're going to do this early. We're going to be proactive in our communication. So when we do that, one of the most important things for families is, how are we going to stay in touch? Because communication is not me telling you things. Communication is, we call it reciprocal, right? It goes back and forth. I'm listening and I'm sharing information as you need it, before you need it, right? In a way that you can understand it, with that growth mindset messaging, right? That's important. So early and powerful. You know, there's a resource from the Flamboyant Foundation that came out this year that is a cool guide. It's called 4 Ways to Build Relationships with Families at the Beginning of the School Year. And I want to point you to that resource and some others as I present to you this morning, so that you'll be able to take a look at those later and see, and we've also have all the resources that I'm sharing with you today posted on our website. So easy space to go back to and find these things again. So that Flamboyant Foundation is a great resource. But how to stay in touch. Here's how I'm going to communicate with you. Here's how you can hear back from me. As a policy in our school districts and in our schools, if we can have a policy say, all families will know how to stay in touch with us, how they're going to hear from us, and how they can communicate with us. That's important. How to ask questions. Here's where you can bring your questions. We know that sometimes our most frustrating and sort of dysfunctional ways of communicating with one another are when emotions build, when we're uncertain, and there's a lot of that going on right now. We don't have a lot of margin. We all have a lot of stress. How to ask questions. Here's how you can ask questions, and we're listening to you, right? So communicating that to our families, having a system to do that in our school districts. Another way is, how's it going? An important message right now, and I think this is one that we have learned that we don't want to lose. Just like Michelle Brooks shared with us, we've learned so many things during this time of COVID. Here's one to hang on to and bridge into our practices as we continue, and that is, how's it going? How is that homework going? How is your student engaging? How are things at home? How can we help? Inquiring of families, how's it going? That's an important message and something that we should continue to do, to be aware of and really taking the pulse with our families. How is that learning at home happening? All right, another, does your child have what they need? Another, ask, right? Another invitation for two-way communication, invitation from families to say, let us know, do you have what you need? These are important messages to get out early and often to families. Another is, how does your child learn best, especially in our earliest communications with families? As we're figuring this out, as you're supporting their learning at home, how does your child learn best? From your senior in high school to your preschooler. How can we help? How can we design learning for them in your home, in whatever space they're in, if it's a remote learning pod, if they're coming to school part-time, how does your child learn best? Another important message, I'm not going to give up. Right, so we're getting started. We've got things going. Another message, though, is we're not going to give up. We're going to continue to learn these important messages for family right now. So I've shared with you about using a growth mindset language. Another thing, as we look at our communications, are we speaking in a way that is hopeful, in a way that lets folks know that it's all right that we make mistakes when things aren't going right? That's all right. Let's figure out how we can do it better. That's the language that brings hope and sort of for the future to our families when we use that growth mindset language about how we speak. And I think it's also important at this time to really share a little bit about ourselves. Many of us you're on my back porch with me, right? We are in one another's lives. It helps when our families and our educators and our professional educators who know a little bit about one another. We're both humans. We're humans experiencing this together, working together for our kids and to support their learning. These are important messages that I hope school leaders are looking for in their policies and practices across the district and really supporting them. So I'd love for you to jump into the chat. I'm sorry, let me minimize here a little bit. All right, sorry. I want to for you to jump into the chat here with me. And what is one early communication practice, one proactive communication practice that you would recommend to all the staff in your district? What's one? Positive phone calls. I agree. They're personal. They're early. They get off on the right foot. Thanks for that. What are others? If you could recommend that everyone in a school district did something, what would it be? Calling families before school starts. Being clear about ways to communicate. Absolutely. Knowing language. Absolutely. What language families are speaking and need for us to speak into them. One of them is just clear, ordinary English, but also being very aware of the languages that are spoken in the homes of our students and providing our communication to them in languages that they understand. Absolutely. Handwritten note mailed home. Very personal. I found the individual texting with choices of meeting times. That's a great example. Thank you. These are wonderful. Offering resources and strategies one at a time. Sure, not overwhelming. That's something we heard loud and clear. It was overwhelming when we said, here's a lot of resources, right? Giving out resources in a timely way. Welcome letter in the home language. Phone call to every family from a teacher to the parent and the student. All right. Meeting with IEP teams before the school year starts, making sure everyone is on the same page and clear on how to communicate. All right, you know what, Kristen has mentioned that my audio is breaking up a little bit. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to turn off my video so we will just have the PowerPoint slides and my voice, just so that I'm doing my best to make this presentation clear. All right, let's keep going here. So a way that I would suggest, I like communicating once a week with families. Thanks for that, Krista. We use remind and send pictures in the moment. You know, for me, I was with a lot of you that a brief phone call or a voice message saying, hello, and I'm looking forward to being your child's teacher, your child's nurse, your child's reading teacher, your child's graduation coach, whoever it's coming from. And let me know if you ever have concern about your child's learning this year. And I'm going to be in touch regularly. Reaching out in multiple ways to ask families and adults how they prefer to communicate. Jill, I think that's a great point, that this is not something we should decide on our own, but that we should be informed by families about the most effective ways to communicate with them. Thank you all for just jumping in the chat for that. Let's think about communication and learning at home in some different ways here as well. So a little bit more about communication. Another aspect of this that we really want to focus on is that we're communicating regularly. So what does that look like? This really means having a system of intentional outreach and listening. So there we go, outreach and listening. So having those monthly personal check-ins with families, not waiting for families to have sort of an issue, right? That's sometimes the message I know I received as a parent, others have too, you know, we'll call you if there's an issue. And that is not really a healthy or productive way for us to be communicating. So intentional outreach, we know that we've seen schools and teachers having sort of their list. Here's my list of families. Here's how they prefer to be communicated with. And I'm making sure that I'm checking it off. No one's falling through the cracks. I have a system of making sure that I'm communicating with everyone, right? Another thing, keeping track. Again, no one is left out. So we have a system and also that no one is left out. That it is both constructive and positive. So we have learned from lots of studies that short messages to families that say, here's something your child can do. Here's the brief message I have to you. We are seeing this with Ready for K with some early literacy apps. We're also seeing this in high school and in other settings that very clear, concise remark is a helpful thing for families, and keeping it positive again. Yeah. Live check-ins, again, are really important. And many of you mentioned that and have already said that live check-ins. Timely also, right? So the timeliness, so having information, like we said, before we need it, when we need it, right? So that families can be responsive. If I hear something about communication regularly from families, is that I heard too little and I heard too late, and how frustrating that is for families. So really thinking ahead of being really timely with our communication with families. I think also listening to families, and I like to talk with schools about our culture of listening, and do we have a culture of listening in our schools? And by listening, I mean that we have opportunities for families to speak to us, we hear from them, and we make change. Right, I'm going to move along here. I see that our time is short. Number one, being responsive, and that really is responding when there are questions and responding to input from families, making changes. And also probably a very powerful thing for us to remember is to presume positive intent. It really is a game changer when we assume that the other person has the best in mind for their family, the best in mind for their child. If they're communicating it to us in a way that's frustrating for us or doing something that we don't necessarily agree with, we need to presume positive intent on their part. Family-focused communication is limited in a focused set of platforms. So this means that families don't have 30 different apps they need to check every day if they have 3 children. Right? If we have family-focused communication, we're looking at children who have multiple children in a district, and then we're saying how many different platforms, how many different links does one family need to connect to in a given day? If we can limit across our districts, having district-wide, even school-wide, and limit it to our the platforms, that way families can be more focused and it's a less stressful experience for them. Also, culturally valid and responsive, using home language, that is critical to a really effective family-focused communication. Considering the stress levels and the margin of families when we speak to people who are stressed and have that limited time margin, we really need to be positive and concise in our messaging, right? Another is coordinating so that we can be inclusive of all families as we think about our families of students with receiving special education services, our families who speak languages other than the language spoken in the school, if we have families who do not have internet access, that when we communicate, we are including all. As leaders, our systems really need to include all. And that sort of means we have a multi-tiered system of support. So this is what I mean. Many of you are familiar with the triangle, right? The practices, the instructional practices we have that everyone receives in that green area. The yellow, the targeted interventions we provide when instruction or behavioral supports for students, when students need a little more. And the red is that most intensive, when students need quite a bit of support. And I think as we think about leading family engagement, leading communication and supports for learning at home, our leaders need to say, what are we doing for all families? How are we tailoring to our families who have a certain need, or for a particular reason we need to tailor because our basic communication and supports for learning at home are not reaching them? And then finally, the third, our most intensive or individualized strategies. And we've seen school districts have plans that say, this is how we're going to communicate with all. And here's how we're going to communicate when there's an issue, when we can't reach a family, when we need to adapt so that we can be understood. And I fully agree with Michelle Brooks and others in our keynote who said, we don't have hard to reach families. We have families for whom we need to have different communication strategies. All right. So I want to move here to learning at home, right? That next category. So when we think about this, helping families know our grade level standards, our class content. That's important at this time for our families to know, here's what your child is going to be learning this year. Here's what we're learning in this next unit. So families know where their child are and their child's progress in meeting those goals for this year, right? Families are unsure. They don't know what happened last spring. They're really not sure how to check in the same way we always did. So how do I know how well my child is doing? That can be really stressful for families. So having clear message as a leader, we want our families to know in a very timely way how their child's progressing. Specifically, simply, and individually, what the child, family, and teacher are all going to do to support learning. Those are important messages and supports for learning at home at this time. Having flexibility in assignments is also important. Not every family can set up a wonderful learning space for their child at home. Not every family has internet access. We like to think of it as universally designing family engagement. So how do we design so that everyone can participate? And that's going to mean having different approaches and having flexibility for families. And differentiating also, knowing some students are going to want more, right? We're going to have extended learning opportunities for some, and some are going to need less, but they all need to be on track and they all need to be learning. And we have a guidance document around supporting learning at home that Kristen has posted in the chat that I hope that you'll look at after this session. We think this is in particular, we have always advocated in our center for modeling practices using video. We've worked for years with teachers just to utilize their cell phone, to just video themselves doing things. If we want families to support a certain type of reading strategy with children, we'll just take a short video and show us how to do that. The same thing goes with supporting our high schoolers and our middle schoolers. What are those short, informative videos that will break that down for our families? We think that that's a powerful practice at this time. We also have been really impressed by the response to office hours. Families that know that there is a time set aside where I can reach out to teachers. We've seen this in lots of school districts. They've set aside time every day or every week. There's a designated time where families know someone will be listening at that time. Not every family may tune in at every learning session, but knowing that's available speaks volumes to families about our accessibility and our willingness to be responsive to them. So holding regular times for families to be able to talk with us, that's important. We've seen great videos at a local school district here in Ohio, Pickerington, Ohio. If you look at the Lakewood Junior High website, they made some great short videos that we think are nice exemplars of that. If you want to look more at communication of English learner families, I hope you'll look on our website at the Eakin Elementary videos in our training section, where we have videos of how they really adapted to the Somalis families and community in their that are served by their school district and by their school and how they communicated with them. I hope that you'll tap into some of the resources on our website in order to learn more about these things. A little bit more about learning at home is at this point in time, we really need to reflect on what we're asking families to do at home, what we're calling homework, and really know, is it necessary? Is it important? Is what we're asking families to do truly something that is going to make an impact for student learning? And if it's not, then I think we don't have the time, we don't have the margin in our day to be doing things that aren't really going to drive student learning. We need to really focus in on those most impactful things. Another thing is to use familiar tools. And if it's a new tool, help me become familiar. Send me a tutorial, show it to me during office hours. Give us time to become familiar with tools. Another is providing organizers. We have an example organizer that we shared last spring. We saw many families not knowing where to go, shuffling through papers, not knowing which Zoom link to click on when. An organizer that, much like our website page, it says at this point in time, here's how you're going to connect, here's what you should be doing, can be doing, and helping families to see the organization of it. And offering really explicit and clear instructions in home languages, in an ordinary language so that families can understand. And probably most important is to say, how's it going? Is the support that I'm providing enough? Do you need something different? Do you have the supplies that you need? All of those things, seeking feedback is important to supporting learning at home. And I also would say that advocating for broadband internet access and devices for all students K-12. That's something I think we can all get behind. We even see now that it's being considered a determinant of health, a social determinant of health in our country. It's having access to broadband internet. And I think that really advocating for that for our families and for our students is important for us to do. And probably the thing that I'm going to say the least about in those three areas I said I was going to talk about with you today, communication, learning at home, and connecting families with supports, is this area of connecting families to supports. It's really a whole area, and we have a couple other sessions that really address this that I hope you'll tap into and even watch the recording if you weren't able to visit that session. But we have teachers on the front line, we have nurses on the front line, we have school bus drivers and others who are on the front line interacting with our families, right? But they have a lot of work to do. And so we really believe as leaders, we need to know what that system of support is for families so that teachers and others who hear from families who are practicing that feedback loop saying, how is it going? That they know that they can rely on their school counselor or their school social worker or their homeschool liaison, a school nurse, and an intervention specialist. There's someone that they can turn to quickly and say, this is what I know. This family is asking for this sort of support. How can we help? And to make those connections so that those support staff can then connect to mental health and behavioral health services, to the very physical services that families need, accommodations, academic supports, and that we have follow-up, home visits and other things when we know that we need to sort of step into that tier 2 and tier 3 level of our work. These are, this is the type of system that we want to see that each classroom teacher has, that each person in a school who's interacting with families can count on their school leader to say, this doesn't all rest on you. There's a system of support, and here's what you can do. We want to hear from families, and here's what you can do when you hear that a family needs support. So I'd like to just use just one more minute. I see that we are over by a minute and I need to end. But can we use just the last minute, just in a few words, will you describe the most important thing about how your schools support family engagement this year? Let's just use the chat very quickly for that. It's the how. This circle, while you're entering in your answers, and I see flexibility. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Flexibility is very important. It's always been important, but I think that we see it very clearly now that a one-size-fits-all assignments, one-size-fits-all communication or family engagement does not work. Availability, thank you, Jill, or Dawn, for availability, being more intentional, absolutely, being planful and intentional in our work, encouraging relationships with empathy, grace for others and for ourselves. I like that you included both there, Jill. I think that is important. Communication, being available, connecting everyone with the same information, absolutely. Everyone. So that means our families that don't speak English, right? That means our families that need us to put it in very ordinary terminology. Thinking outside the box. Thank you. Partnership, having a partnership mindset and understanding. Simon Sinek, and Kristen will put the link to Simon Sinek, this is the golden circle of Simon Sinek, right? We need to know why we do what we do. We need to know how we're going to do it and what. We can't start with what. We can't say, we use Class Dojo, we use Seesaw, we engage families, we have a home visit, right? It's not the what we do. We must know why. We do it so that we can support students, right? Their well-being, their learning. That's why we're doing it. And how we do it is through family engagement. And we do it in these ways that you've said here, being creative, being relational, being understanding, being flexible. It's really important as leaders to tap into the why, the how, and the what of how we are engaging families at this time. Here are a few that I thought of: keeping it simple, extending grace, presuming positive intent on the part of others, listening to our students and giving families the support they need. And you all have thought of many others that are just very valuable in how we engage with families. So I'm going to turn on my camera very briefly and hoping that continues to work. And I just want to thank all of you for spending this time in this session with me. Just like our metaphor, right, about mission control. That's why we're here, so that we know that families are experts in their individual child. The teachers are experts in content and child learning and development, and communities are expert in providing resources and supports, and we want to connect all of those things for every student. So thanks for joining this session.